Hello and welcome to C-Suite Secrets. I'm Heather Parsons, your host, a serial entrepreneur, fractional CFO, and a business value strategist. I've spent years juggling business and family life while helping entrepreneurs scale, optimize their cash flow, and build real financial success. On our show, we bring you real conversations with founders, executives, and operators about what actually moves the needle in their business. No fluff, no filler, just smart strategy, systems that work, and insights that you can put to use in your business right away. With that, let's dive right in. Today on C-Suite Secrets, we have John Bentley on the show. John, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you. So for folks who may not know who you are, tell us a little bit about you and your journey as an entrepreneur and how you got here.
I actually started off life as a programmer. At 10 years old, my dad got a TRS-80 color computer, the kind you used to hook to the TV back in the dark ages.
Yep.
And he started learning how to program and started teaching me. And then we had a PC in the house when I was like 13. So right after they came out, when most businesses didn't have one. So I had a tremendous leapfrog into the information age. When my dad was learning to program and was more of an engineer, I was more of a natural learner. You know, sometimes we use the term hacker, and this is more of the term of exploratory learning. And so as I went through school and then went on to a more formal education, I had a chance to work early on with some startups and building software, and then switched to more of a traditional corporate role. I actually think it's good to get some experience in the corporate world, especially when you're first starting out, because you have a lot more, or a firm or something established, because you have a lot more structure. You get to see a lot more things quickly. From there, I eventually got up to an upper management position at Sprint and decided I'd had enough fun after about 3 years of layoff. So I went and go help with a family business, and I've been doing more small business and startup ever since. So I am a serial entrepreneur. I have a company called SpotOn.Pet that's still operating in the New York area. We've been operating for, I've lost count, almost 10 years, and maybe about 8, but it's not quite taken off. It's a pet service, giving rides for people and pets, kind of like Uber, but it's just been a lot of headwinds keeping it, but I give great credit to our CEO who's kept it running and kept it operational. And then 10XTS is a fintech startup I co-founded that was bringing real world assets on a blockchain, which is we're still trying to do. And we're being acquired by the Conduit network, CNDT. And so I'm exiting from it and started more of a fractional CTO practice, still working with startups and focused a lot in early stage and then helping scale. As I call it, it's idea to market and then momentum to scale.
I like that. As a serial entrepreneur myself, I always love talking to others who are not, on their first time around the sun when it comes to being in business. So I'd love your take on what you see. Me personally, I see a lot of themes that go from one business to another, right? So business, I consider business 80% is just business in general. 20% is your widget and what you're selling. And of that 20%, about 5 is your secret sauce, right? So I'd love to hear, as you're in these multiple businesses and you're working with startups and all these other industries as a CTO, what are some of the common mistakes that you see people making over and over again?
I think early on with a product, there's a rush to go to what you think is a fully defined product when you don't really have a full understanding of what you're going to go build. So when you're first trying to go to market, you have a great idea, but like you said, the idea is, and the uniqueness of it is actually the minority part of what you're going to go build.
Right.
Usually you have some idea of what's in the market and what's needed because you usually build from expertise or your own frustration. But as much as that is, once you become a builder, your mind kind of changes in how you're thinking about it. In some respects, you may have thought about it a lot more than other people. And so now you kind of stepped outside of the problem and you're no longer living in the middle of it like a lot of people are. You're now living kind of outside, trying to figure out how to drive a solution through. So, it's funny. I did a presentation at a couple of startup conferences called Making the Leap from Idea to Market, and I turned it into a booklet. And as I started writing the booklet, I spent half my time talking about just market research and really getting to know the customer and understanding the customer's journey and slowing down the build to get ready for it. So spending that time with customers, learning their language, doing small things to introduce change to get their reaction. And it's not just about testing some of the how-to or the widget or the what. It's really also learning how the customer views the problem, how the customer views the value proposition of what you're about to change, and how the customer talks about it. So that way you understand how to connect with them in their language. The greatest tool in the world is not great if no one can figure out how to use it or can understand what it's for. So I think that's really the big challenge.
You're speaking my language right there. Being a finance person on a lot of technical implementations, like big SAP projects and other implementations, I think that's where, from a technology perspective, it's really hard, right? Because if you don't understand your customer, if you don't slow down and take that time, you're building what you think they want rather than what they really believe that they need. There's in the finance world, we need to do both, right? And I think technology is very similar, that you need to give them some of what they think they want and a whole lot of what they actually need and kind of marry that together. But if you don't take the time to listen and really kind of get to know your customer, it's really hard to do.
Well, if you've never worked in large IT, you don't really have a lot of experience with what building software is like. Just like, if you never run a business, so you really have, I've sat in the bookkeeping role for companies and things that we managed, and so I've got an appreciation for accounting and finance and the things I don't know. But 80% of all software projects are never used.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of the expenditure that's done in IT, the industry rate, if you check it out, and this is, the enterprise model is, I'm going to go launch a ship, and except I don't have the ship built. And, I think I'm going to the East Indies. I'm going to end up in the Americas, but I think I need a wooden ship and I really need a submarine. It's those kind of problems. And so they launch out with these big things, but there's an 80% failure rate. So the big question I ask is, I have a lot of entrepreneurs more early stage, and they're wanting to build an MVP. And somebody said to them, I got, the low end is $30,000. They go up to about 100, and someone's offered to build one. And the first question I ask is, are you $30,000 smart? Are you at $30,000 confident? Because $30,000 is a lot of money to spend. My rule on a lot of money to spend is if I don't have it on me. And I carry about $30, $40 on me. So anything that's not $30 or $40 is expensive, just by definition.
Right.
But it's tough, though, because they really want to get it out there. And there's all this energy and excitement, but the preparation for it is very difficult.
Right, exactly. And you mentioned, I think you said MVP. Tell me a little bit about what that means.
MVP. So if you're in the startup product world, especially software, MVP is like the holy grail. It stands for minimum viable product. And it's really an interesting balance because minimum is doing as little as possible. But viable means it really is usable, and product means it's in a product format. One of the challenges, especially for more technical founders, is the desire to overbuild and put in all the features. Even for the non-technical side, they're working with builders who want to build everything, but also they're used to sitting down with very complete products. Now, if you have a product that 1,000 people are going to use over the next month, you need all kinds of things. You need sign up. You need, the registration process, the onboarding. You need password resets. You need things like that. But usually when you launch your first MVP, You don't need those things. So I'm actually well known, for pushing the limits on what minimum and viable really are. The first time when you really should be trying to get 1 to 5 customers for a first release. With 1 to 5 customers, I don't need sign up. I don't need you registering for a plan. I don't even need you to create a user account. I can hand you your password. I can do all these things for you that feels more like a concierge service. Because with those first customers, you really want to engage and be hands-on, because you're really trying to learn what's working and what's not. And you're really earning the right to go add those next 5 customers. And you keep growing in these increments. So you're 5, you're 10, then you're 20, then you're 30, and then you start growing a little bit more. And all the time you're building those features and you're pulling in things so that at first it's real concierge and it's real intervention based, but then you start handing off that self administration. In one MVP, we had a customer, we had a couple of people that tried some things out, and we had one that got far enough that he actually requested a password reset because he couldn't remember his password. He didn't want to ask me to reset it anymore. So we went ahead and added it in there. But at that point, it became a requested feature and it actually became needed. But before then, and things like, some places you can get, they have stuff off the shelf they can kind of put in at first. But it also means your programmers are spending time on that rather than really trying to find what that 5% is. And if you think just about your own experience of signing up for something, like I had a friend recommend I try out Notion the other day.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm like, well, it sounds cool, but I already know what I'll have to do. I'll have to go to their page, figure out how to sign up, maybe put in a credit card,
Yep.
and go through all these steps just to get an idea of what it feels like to use it. Those are all barriers to me experiencing Notion. Now, they're a large product. Those barriers make sense. Those barriers also qualify me as a customer. But at the same time, when you're really early on and people aren't sure why they're talking to you at all, they have to be highly engaged and highly invested. But you want to reduce that barrier, you want to reduce that friction so they can get right to what the meat of it is, because that's what you're going to sell upon. That 20 of the Pareto principle, that 20%, and really that magic you said 5%. That's really what you got to get. You got to validate and you got to refine, because that's what's going to carry you across the finish line.
I love that. And I think I was talking to somebody earlier today as well, and they were talking about really getting to know your customer, what they want, what they need. Because if you're not doing that, I think you're going to have all of this money tied up, to your point earlier. And somebody like me is going to come along and say, you know what, we're not paying for that. Like, we already have 20 other products that do 75% of what you're selling me. And I can hire somebody in to do it for a third of what it's going to cost me to pay you to do it. Right. So it's like, if you don't know your customer super well, you would never know that that's going to be one of the barriers that's going to get you caught. And you don't necessarily know who your competitors are on the field.
So. Yeah, I talked to an entrepreneur the other day about an idea, and she hadn't really taken off developing it. Part of the problem was she's got a unique idea, but it's in a saturated space. And so I said, what you're really going to have to do is focus in on that one difference that'll make it to where you can get up to maybe 100 people over a period of time that would actually use it for that core feature. And then you can add in all those other things that are pretty common. But you have to go about it that way, and you have to go and curate those customers and really get them to where they are. They're the ones that will take you forward. And there are things you can do, and this is what I had recommended to her. I coined something that is based on some experience, but didn't really have a name. Since all entrepreneurs are really hooked into the MVP, I came up with this little brother, the MCO, the Micro Convertible Offering. And the Micro Convertible Offering, so the minimal viable product, what it's doing in the life cycle of a product. And if you're going venture backed, especially, the MVP is where you're generally trying to raise money to build the MVP at the seed phase. and then you exit to Series A to turn the MVP into a more scalable product. And those are just milestones, whether you're fundraising or not. But prior to getting to that MVP, you're trying to prove market traction. So to get people to invest or to buy into it, they have to believe that you can go get customers. But it's really getting harder to get even angel investors to invest at that level. So if you take a step back and say, what's the smallest thing I can market test? And so Micro Convertible Offering is really looking at that 5% and saying, how can I deliver this as a service, but in a product wrapper? So I first tried this, somebody was looking at pricing strategy. And I'm like, the thing that I would want to test first is, will someone engage with an online service, upload their pricing data, and then download the analytic results?
Ooh.
So the thing that we built to test was the upload feature, managing the request. The analysis was still done manually, and you could download the reporting. And that was enough to go and test that market engagement. And you're still making money at it too. If you have a business that you're trying to more growth hack it or self-fund, you can actually go build that out to more of an agency model. And then what you find yourself doing is turning your initial offering into an MVP, but building it out as you have money coming in and as you have need. So now you're doing almost, it's kind of interesting is you're doing kind of an IT project of I need automation to scale, but you're doing it with a product mindset and moving from a done for you, done with you to do it yourself model. For some smaller, I've been trained in venture capital, so that's always where my brain goes first. But most businesses are not large exitable businesses. We used to talk about unicorns versus zebras. And zebras were the ones that were designed to go run the distance. And so when you're running a business, you really are trying to create something so you don't own a job, but you are actually creating something that can go run itself. Getting to that do-it-yourself model is really where you start seeing scale, and then having maybe a premium done with you or done for you type of service. And you can back into that, but it's really about finding somebody that can think like a product manager or hiring a product manager, but they can construct the build out like an IT project where you're automating and scaling over time.
That's some great advice, and thinking about that MVP, what is one feature that you think most founders could eliminate from their MVP and just not build out today as they're going through that process?
I mean, I really think early on, user management and subscription management are two things. You can get aspects of them off the shelf, so adding them in later is not real hard. But I just, if you're doing it right, you're doing like 5 or 10 customers at first. You can build them through Stripe invoicing. You should only really have one plan, so you don't need a lot of sophistication. And you should be able to handle their user management by hand as well, or with what I call programmer intervention, which means one of your tech people is actually just jamming it directly into the system and making it work. So those are things that you can, you've got to have someone that's building it, that's thinking about leaving hooks for those things, but you don't need to really spend a lot of time on that. So having the slickest sign up process and page and all that type of stuff is really it's just really the wrong focus. I mean, you're not going to do it unique, and you're not going to do it better than everyone else, and it's not going to make the difference when you're with your first, I'd say even sometimes up to 30 customers.
That makes a lot of sense because, if I'm interested in a product, as long as the sign up process is not super cumbersome, I really don't care. I already know that I want it because it should make my life easier, for sure.
Well, and in this case, I mean, your first 30, or the first 10, this would be someone that's already talked to you about the problem you're trying to solve, and you've already been bought in that you want to see this problem solved, and now you're helping them test the product. So, you're not, that's what's interesting is that, when we talk about early adopters and things like that, I mean, these are the earliest adopters. This is almost like a mini little cult or something. There's just a lot of devotion, a lot of interest. And it's really first 5 or 10 are like people that, like, you found like their trigger point. Like, this is the thing that, if they're just blowing off steam, or it's like, what really frustrates me, and it's the thing they just vent about all the time. And you're now giving them a more positive outlet to do something about it.
I like it. That's very cool. Well, John, I know you also work as a fractional CTO. So I'd love to hear, as you're going in to help these founders, what's one green flag and maybe one red flag that lets you know if you want to say yes or no as a fractional CTO?
It's interesting is that, it's never the technology. It's never the stack. It's never, it doesn't really matter how big of a mess it is. It really goes to mindset. I've worked as a co-founder several times. I joke, it's like I'm a cranberry juice. I'm never what you order, but I always come with it, or because I'm always the plus one. I'm a co-founder, and happy to be that with. And what attracts me to founders in general is when they have a real passion and vision, but they also have respect for the fact that it's going to take several different roles and several different people. So the real green flag is that there's a respect for the art and craft of actually forming the technology. There's also an understanding that the technology is a tool to solve the problem, but is not the solution itself. So, the more the red flag is either there's a disdain for the technology and the people that work in it, which I can kind of understand because I've been in technology my entire life, and we leave a lot of bad taste in people's mouths. So some of the reputation's actually earned. Or the other side is they treat it like it's magic and can solve everything. One time I was working with a client, and we were working with NFTs. And it was it wasn't looking at like selling art or like weird looking apes or something. It was actually looking to use it to solve a real problem, which is a green flag. But the red flag was that all we would talk about was NFTs like they were magic. And so I had him get down, and I basically said, listen, you got to tell me what you want to do, but you can't use the word crypto, blockchain, NFT, or token. And basically he was selling memberships that yielded stays at a hotel. And so really, really think about it. What it is that it's a membership that yields a voucher. But the unique thing was the memberships are resellable and the vouchers are resellable. And that was the NFT piece of it. So, getting to that point where people really appreciate the problem, the technology and stuff is really, that's all I know I can help out. The things though, I'd say, with that red flag, it's some of the warning things. I was doing a consult on an acquisition earlier this year, and they were buying. It was more like an acqui-hire because they wanted the guy's platform, but they really wanted him and what he built because it was a training solution. But he didn't have control of the source code or of any of the systems and accounts. In fact, he told us what they were using to deliver it. But when we finally got to the outsourced developer, who was really a great provider and really was watching out for their clients, so I give him kudos for that. But he didn't know what they were actually using to run the system. So when I walk in, if I walk in and a client's really open to moving forward, but they don't have ownership of their assets and they're looking to change, that's one of those problem areas that I go address right off, because if you don't have control of the assets, it's really bad. And the thing that's almost as bad is if you have control of them, but you have nobody on your team that can do anything with them. Yeah. And so I talk about effective ownership with clients all the times, or entrepreneurs looking at outsourcing and things. I'm a big fan of partnering and using outsourced resources. There's a lot of place for it. But if you hire someone out of your organization to build everything, and you have no one that can understand what they built to help with the transition or anything, then while you may legally own your intellectual property, you don't effectively own it. It's like the old days when people used to buy a car, but they couldn't drive it. They had a chauffeur that was also a mechanic. Yeah, they owned the car, but the car was just kind of useless without the person that was hired to actually operate it and maintain it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it makes me think about security, a lot of things from a founder perspective, especially a non technical founder perspective. And I would love your thoughts on if you are a non technical founder and you do need to hire somebody to come in and do development work like what you're talking about or help you operate your business, what are some things that you should look out for and really kind of plan ahead for?
Well, so if the only person who's got it worse in early businesses than programmers is graphic designers doing free, trying to give people free logos and stuff like that. But technical people are always approached about startups, especially when it's equity based. So the first thing is that you need somebody technical on your team. You need at least an advisor, you know, or you need someone that's, you really need someone a little more than an advisor. I mean, that's why I do the fractional CTO thing. Is you need someone on your team that's watching out for you and your interests to help make sure this thing's going to happen. When you go out and start hiring the outside provider, the first big red flag for me, and I've talked to several groups that do this, is where they will do the build for a combination of equity plus cash. So what they want you to do is go raise money. Most of the money you're going to raise, you're going to pay them, and they're also going to get equity in the company. Now, this creates, I'm all for equity incentive partners and things, but based on what they're charging, generally based on the rates, they are making cost to cost plus. So they're making cost plus some minimum margin, and they're planning to, make a lot of money off of off a few equities. They're almost doing like a VC formula for that. But at the end of it, now you have somebody on your cap table, and if you're not happy with what they're producing and you want to replace them, they're always part of your cap table. So you end up with some captive equity. So that's one thing I work out for. The other thing is, and this is difficult when you're first starting out, is having the developers build the software and run it in the production environment. So this is kind of like having the people that figure out how to make the product also run the factory. So there's no real separation. And in software, it's a bit trickier because we go and build it and then it goes and runs out there on the cloud. Well, the cloud's really just the internet, and that's how we get to the thing. On the other side of the cloud, a cloud computer is just called someone else's computer. You're renting space in it. It's almost like having a storage unit that you can't visit physically. You can only get there through a portal. And if they're running that, they're running everything. So, that's where making sure, they're using a code repository where you own the code, where you're tracking it, and you're engaged in things like that. When they come and say they can build it in 30 days, or they can, and they can use AI to do it and stuff like that, most likely what you're getting is a canned set of things they've already built, which may or may not be okay. But if they build your product and you take the code, everything that they've included in there, first you have to make sure you can take all the pieces with you, and then you have to maintain it. Same thing with anything open source.
Yep.
Or any library you use. Everything that runs in your product is your responsibility, and so you have to be careful what you're using because it really affects what you're doing.
That's a very good point. I think owning that code, there's a lot that comes with that, right? And I could dive in and talk about that forever, but I also want to get to, you mentioned the cap table a minute ago, and you've talked about VC a couple of times. But on the code and owning the information, I think that's a key takeaway for anybody who's listening. Be sure what you own and be sure what you can take and be sure that you understand where those limitations lie. Because if you're a non technical founder like myself, that could mean a huge difference for you whenever you go to exit your business because what you thought was your IP may not be.
Well, and the other thing, I think the change cost, if you have like the more code someone writes that no one else has ever seen. So imagine taking over a manuscript of a book that's like or a set of manuals that's like thousand pages for your business process, but you've never actually looked at it and you really don't understand how that part of it operates. So the time it would take to learn, understand it, and then change it, sometimes it can be almost as much as actually just redoing it.
That makes a lot of sense, especially I know working on IT projects in the past, especially if you're changing language models or if you mentioned going to the cloud versus running on prem or doing these other things, the cost can really pile up quickly. And things that you're not used to paying a ton for, like if you're hosting internally, like compute, for example, now you have to be super conscious because you're paying for that as you go to the cloud, just like you're paying for your storage. Storage is thankfully getting much, much cheaper, but all of that stuff factors in because at the end of the day, you still need to be profitable.
Yeah, if you go to Google and you type in Firebase killed my startup, you can learn a lot about the scary side of platform as a service and what seems to be really a cheap way to get started. It's the amount of Medium and other kind of articles on it. It's astounding.
I bet. So I'd love to dive in and talk a little bit about VC and how that's kind of impacted businesses that you've worked with before. You mentioned having people on the cap table like your developer and other folks. Let's dive in and talk a little bit about what that means. I'd like to break down what the cap table is to start with, if you'd like to put your input on that, and then we'll dive into who some of the questions you need to ask before you bring in investors.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, the cap table, and so I'm not a CFO, even though resume
I'll
scan all
add
the
in
time
for
thought I
you.
was. I
Yeah.
worked a lot in fintech, but I mean, the cap table is basically a list of people that own part of your company. So they're generally the shareholders, whether they own directly or own notes or warrants in some other form. I mean, if companies, I don't care. I don't care what you talk about with anything. The only thing you really own is either you own it or it owes to you, and that's it. There's just debt and there's just equity, and everything else is just some sort of magic trick put on top of it, or agreement or something.
Yep.
So the thing is that once somebody owns part of the company, you know, the only way to get rid of that ownership, unless it's an option and it's never, it just doesn't exercise, is to buy them out. So, so one of the things that we recommend for early on, I mean, generally speaking, when you first start, and this is kind of the idea of a fractional CTO or like a heavily engaged technical advisor, you need a little bit of CTO always. You need some strategy and some roadmap and some help with the fundraising. But more than anything else, as a percentage, you need much more build. So if you bring someone on that's a developer a technical person you think could become and help lead the company, I always recommend you put a buy sell agreement in with that person. If unless you've known them a long time or like truly a co-founder, if you're bringing them in that early team with equity compensation. And one of the models that we've used a lot is so let's say I'm going to do $100,000 of work over the next year, but I'm going to take it as equity. So what we do is create an agreement where I'm getting $100,000 worth of equity, but there's a buy agreement that on the next raise I can be bought out for $125,000. So what that allows is for if you got somebody and it's just been a miserable experience, and the idea of them getting rich off of your idea, if you make it, makes you want to just close the company and quit. If it's just that bad, or somewhere near that, then when you do the next raise, you could divert $125,000 of that raise. So now instead of that money going to future build, you're really paying off, covering past sins. But it's a way to buy out. And the reason why it's higher is, if I work for $100,000 for the year and there's a buyout, and I'm deferring my compensation, then it's only right that I get some interest on that risk and things like that. Then maybe 125, maybe that's high, maybe it's 110, but that's kind of where you work with your lawyer and your financial advisors and things to figure out. The rest of the cap table is, when you're raising money to build a company, generally you're raising investment because no, you're trying to find people that believe that you could actually deliver a return, and they're pretty much gamblers. The reason why you can't get a loan is because no loan officer in the world will believe you can pay it back unless you can happen to sign for it all personally and you have some other way to pay for it. That's where, like, small business finance is kind of tricky. I've talked to people before about the debt side, even through government programs, and they're like, the terms are worse. You're better off taking a second on your house. I mean, I've heard all kinds of things from people actually running the government-based lending programs.
Right.
So you start looking at equity. My basic rule of thumb, and I went, I went to Founders Institute at Cincinnati, which is a global founders kind of pre-launch training program. It's a boot camp. It's pretty intense. But the thing I picked up from it, and talking to a lot of people who are doing this, is I'm a believe in the 10 for 10. I'll sell 10% of my company if the money that I'm getting I can turn into a 10x valuation jump. Now you can't always do that, but that's, you might sell 12 and get 8, but that's pretty close, right? So you're wanting to look at it that way. Early on, like when you're getting seed capital, a lot of times you're doing it to get that first build. You're going more for angel investors. Angels are no panacea. It's funny is I think there's one I've worked with where guy's been out fundraising for a while, and he's like, "You're too early for us." Now the guy's not got like an idea on a napkin. He's got a full pro forma, so he's got a good financial statement. He's done a lot of market research. He's talked to industry people, and he's as well prepared to execute on a 3-month build and launch as anybody I've ever seen. But you're still too early for us, and sometimes the money, it seems like it's like you want to bet on the horse race because that's kind of odds you're getting. You want to take the long shot on the horse race. But what they're wanting to seem to do sometimes now is they're wanting to bet like the horse is one length away from winning the race. Like it's a Sunday race and they're betting they're wanting Wednesday odds. It's like you just don't get that kind of return without taking the risk. Anybody you bring on as an investor should be more than money. They should be some way to help grow your business, either through contacts or customers or advice or something else. There should be something they bring to the table beyond just money. Maybe not all of them, but definitely key investors. You got to really watch terms and things for control too, as you bring them on.
That's a really good. Thank you for listening to part 1 of our conversation with John Bentley. Be sure to check out our next week's episode for part 2 as we dive further into the world of entrepreneurship and using venture capital to grow your business. Thank you again for listening to C-Suite Secrets. If you have found today's conversation as valuable as I have, be sure to hit that like and follow button and share with another entrepreneur who's trying to grow their business. If you want more tips on how to grow your business between episodes, check us out on Instagram at Heather Parsons Official. Until next time, keep growing, and remember, you don't have to do this alone.